Hey there! Planting seeds by hand has been important for more than 10,000 years since humans became involved in agriculture. And there are a few types of basic hand planters that have been used, things like the jab type planters. Now, these jab type planters work pretty well for large seeds like corn or beans, but they don't work well for small seeds. Now, when I say small seeds, I mean seeds like sweet alyssum seeds. I've been doing research on sweet alyssum for several years because it's a very important plant that we plant in our vegetable systems in California to attract in beneficial insects, insects like the hoverfly. Hoverflies are really important because they help us to control pests like aphids, and hoverflies need pollen and nectar from alyssum flowers or other flowers to help us do that. And so I've done a lot of research on putting alyssum into fields and how that can help us with some of our pest control needs. But the existing planters that were out there didn't work for sweet alyssum. They're just too crude. So I developed a planter that I call the slide hammer planter. It's called the slide hammer planter because this part here slides, and it's kind of like a hammer. When it hits this washer, it transmits a force down the handle, and that force disrupts seed so there's a little vial down here, the seed that we're trying to plant sits in that vial, so when this slide hammer strikes this, that force is transmitted down here and it disrupts seed in this vial, and the bottom of the vial's got holes in it, okay? And those holes have seed then coming through the holes, and that seed travels all the way down this tube and out into the soil. And this is a really, really effective tool for precise seeding rates of small seeded plants like sweet alyssum and a few others that I think are really kind of interesting and important, especially if we kind of start thinking about them from a nutritional standpoint. The one I'm thinking of is purslane. It's one of my favorite vegetables. It's also a weed, but there are cultivated varieties of purslane that you can buy the seed for, and this planter works really well for planting that seed. You can put in just a few seeds depending on what size hole you've drilled. You use drills to drill holes in the bottom of this of the vials, and you can do a very precise seeding rate with small seeds using this planter. The planter can even work for things like mint. Mint seeds are extremely small. I think there's about 300,000 mint seeds per ounce. And to be able to put out just a few mint seeds with each time this slide hammer strikes is pretty remarkable. I'd actually say this is probably the most precise hand planter that I'm aware of that can be used for planting small seeds. Okay, so let me kind of explain what we're going to do today. So I'm going to obviously explain how to make the planter, and we're going to kind of do that in two parts. The first part will be out in the shop, and for that part what we're going to focus on is this bottom section here. This is what I call the shoe and how that connects into the handle of the planter. And then we will look at how to make this part here so that this washer stays right here and works well on the handle, doesn't slide down. And then the last part, probably the most complicated part, is making the cedar shoe down here out of a piece of copper. So after we've done that, we'll come back in here and then we'll finish off a little bit more of this part, and then we'll put it all together, and we'll be done with that part. And then, excuse me, then I'll demonstrate it in the field just to kind of show you how easy it works and you know, how fast you can walk and things like that. So I'll do a little field demonstration in some lettuce fields, and then we'll come back in again and I'll give you some tips on how to select the best drill bit for making the holes in the bottom of the vial, because that's a really kind of an important part of this. And then we'll talk a little bit about ways to adjust the seeding rate. If you want to have more seeds come out each time the slide hammer drops, there's some tricks and things that will work pretty well with that. And then lastly, I'll talk about some alternative materials that you might use if you, for some reason, can't find some of the things that I've described here. Now, the materials that we're going to use to make this planter are pretty basic. They're things that, for the most part, you should be able to get at a really good hardware store. There's a few things that are little specialty items like these vials, but most of the components are pretty basic. The tools that you'll need are pretty simple. They're basic shop tools, hand tools. One really important thing that I should mention is that this video actually accompanies a paper in the journal Hort Technology. And I wrote that paper to describe this seeder. But I thought it would be helpful if there was actually a video that showed how to put it together, because sometimes it's a little bit hard to understand from a written document how to make something. I know personally I'm a visual learner, and so I thought that having a video might help you to put one of these together as well. So let me just check to make sure I haven't forgotten anything here. Excuse me. All right, so let's go out to the shop. We'll do those parts that we need to work on, and then we'll come back in here and put it all together, and then continue with explaining some of the cool features of this slide hammer stick seeder. Pretty cool. Okay, so let me show you how to connect the seeder foot, this angle iron down here at the bottom. And then I will show you how to make this slightly crimped area here, which holds the EMT coupler and the hammer stop washer right there. And then lastly, I'll show you how to make the seeder shoe, this copper piece at the bottom. Okay, so we'll start with the easiest one, the foot. Okay, so let me put that one down there. All right, so to get the foot to go inside the tube, all you need to do is basically slightly crimp this so that this will slide inside there. Let me just switch out my glasses. The other ones are a little better. All right, let's do that. Hang on. All right, so I've got my piece of tubing right here, and I'm going to put this inside the clamp. And I will put it in the clamp about up to the same distance as this is long. So you don't have to go more than that. Put it like that. And then, see, if I don't crimp this a little bit, it's not going to go inside there. So then I give this a little bit of a crimp. And I keep testing to see if it'll fit in yet. Got to go a little bit more. Okay, so now it slides in there nicely. So you can see that slides in and out of the end of the EMT tubing. Now, once you've got that to where it will slide in and out, yeah, sorry. So once it'll slide in and out, then we're just going to crimp it in there a little bit better so that it doesn't come out at all. And we'll do this several different locations. Okay. So it does feel like it's holding in there now pretty well, but I need to crimp it a little bit better. Okay, that's doing pretty good. Let's get a little bit more on the end. Flip it over. Do the other end part. All right, that looks pretty good. Now, If you wanted to, thought it was necessary, you could take your hammer and just hammer that down to make sure it's really in there good. All right, so now that's nicely secured in the end. Okay, so that part's pretty easy, very simple. All right, now we're going to work on this center section here, which is where the hammer stop washer is, all right? So we need to put the EMT coupler down there, and then we are going to put the washer over that. So what you'll notice when you get these couplers is that the coupler from the store is not meant to slide down on these. These are actually used to connect two pieces of pipe together. And they don't go all the way down because they've got a ridge in the middle. So what you need to do is take your coupler, stick it inside of a vise like this. Don't over squeeze it, just slightly in there. And then file out the inside using a file like this, okay? So I already did that with this one. So this coupler will actually slide down over that. And I've made a mark down here. There's a mark at 1 meter. That's where I want my washer to be, so that the hammer stop washer is right there on that 1 mark. Now, on that 1 meter mark. Now the coupler size that I'm suggesting you use, I'm sorry, not the coupler, but the washer, doesn't quite fit over the EMT tubing. The inside diameter of the washer is a little bit too small. So you need to stick that sorry about that. So you need to put this in your vise and then use your file to file that down just a little bit. And I've already done it with this one, so I filed this down just a little bit. And you can see this will now fit over the EMT tubing. And we're going to take it right down to the 1 meter mark. Okay, so I've got it right there at the 1 meter mark. And then to lock this in there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pipe, my EMT tube. So hold it right there at the 1 meter location. And I'm going to turn it so that when I finish, I'm going to actually crimp this bottom section here right below this. And I'm going to have it crimped in the same direction as these, the set screws are, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so I got my washer at 1 meter. And you know, it doesn't have to be exactly at 1 meter. Okay, so it's right there. And I'm going to put my tube right inside the clamp there. Just make sure all that lines up right. Yep, there's the 1 meter mark. Here's my EMT coupler. Now notice the set screws here, I'm orienting them so that they're the same direction as the vise is going to squeeze it. And the reason for that is that I think it's going to that those set screws will connect to the pipe better, because that's because of the way the compression works. Okay, so I got everything set there. Now what you want to do is you want to just squeeze that down until it's crimped just about 1/2 inch. And I'm going to use my tape measure to check when the crimping has gone down to about 1/2 inch. Okay, so just give it a little bit of a squeeze. Check with my tape measure. Now I can go a little bit more. You don't want to over crimp this part, because if you over crimp the EMT tubing, you're going to make it weaker. So I just want to crimp it enough so that this coupler and washer can't slide any further down there. That looks pretty good right there. All right. Now take this guy out and look at that. All of a sudden the coupler will not move now. Okay, so again, just to clarify, I squeezed it so that it's like this and the set screws come that way. Now what you can do is you can take your screwdriver and just tighten those set screws, okay? So the set screws are tightened and that's not going anywhere. Now the washer might still be a little bit loose, that's fine. It doesn't matter if that moves because it's going to get hammered when the slide hammer slides down there anyway. You know, when this action is happening, that's going to hold the washer in place. All right, so we've got our foot on, we've got the center part crimped, and now we're going to do the last part, which is the foot. I'm sorry, not the foot, but the cedar shoe. All right, now what I would suggest you use is the blue type copper, and that blue type copper is a little bit thicker than the red one. Remember, this is what we're trying to produce, is something like this. So if you look down here at the end, you can see this has got a nice V or U shape. And I've got my mark 1.5 inches up from there. Now this one I actually made with the red type copper, which is a little bit thinner. It'll be fine, but I think the blue one should last a little longer. Okay, so I'm going to stick my pipe in there, and I'm not tightening it too much, just a little bit. Critical thing now is you're going to cut this at about 1.5 inches up. You don't want to cut more than a little bit less than halfway through. Okay, so I want to cut just a little bit less than halfway through the pipe. The reason you don't want to go too far is because this end piece won't be as strong if you cut too far through that. So I'm going probably, I don't know, maybe 75% of the way through, or maybe 80% actually. All right, so that looks pretty good right there. So it doesn't take very long. Okay, so I've got my little cut there. Now what you're going to do is you're going to orient this so that it's lined up correctly in your vise. When I say correctly, I want to make sure that it's not, the cut isn't too much this direction or too much that direction. All right, so let's see here. That looks pretty good. Just a little bit. And I know you may not be able to see this clearly through the video, but the cut is just slightly above the top of the vise. All right, now what you're going to do is we're going to give it a little squeeze and then just check it. All right, that looks pretty nice. So I've already started to squeeze it down. See that? So it's coming out pretty nice and centered. I don't want that crimp to be, or the compression to be one side this way or one side that way. I want it pretty much in the middle. Okay. Now you could do this with a hammer if you wanted to, but I think it's actually far more accurate to do it with a vise. Okay, now once I've got it to about that point there, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to put the end of it in the vise this way and start crimping, and I'm going about a little bit less than halfway or so. Okay. And I'll bring it and do the other side as well. What you can see is I'm starting to get a little bit of a nice V shape right there. go nice and slowly, actually comes out pretty good. So check that out, looking pretty nice, huh? It's not really hard. It's a lot of fun actually to do this. All right, so I'm trying to bring all those areas where there's a little space together so that it looks like a solid piece. And I'm not, oh yeah, that looks good right there. Okay, now once I've got it to this point, I'm going to take my hammer and pound it so that I can make it into this V shape here a little bit. So to do that, I put it back in the vise there. Just work slowly, you don't need to go fast. It'll come out better if you go slowly, bit by bit. Okay, it's getting more like a little V shape there. Notice I'm alternating it back and forth between both sides. So ideally, when you're done, it'll look, actually that looks pretty darn good right there. I think I might bring it in a little bit more. But ideally, when you're done, you can notice that the area that you've crimped is pretty much in line with the rest of the tube. Okay? Sometimes you might want to put it on here, just give it a little crack like that to bring in the V a little bit more. All right, so that's looking pretty good. I like how the shape looks. I'd say it actually might be a little better than the other one that I made earlier. Now, one last thing I want to mention is that the area right in here, right in the center there, we want to make sure that there's not a gap where seed that's falling. Remember, the seed's going to fall down the tube here, and we want to make sure that seed doesn't somehow go behind the back of this and get caught in a little air space in there. So what I like to do is I like to take a punch like this and go in here and just make sure that I've crimped it really nicely down there. So it's not hard to do. Just take a flat-ended punch like this one, put it right in there where the V is, and then give it a hit. Okay. Okay, so again, I'm just going right into this section here and just making sure that the tubing is really crimped together right there. You can actually go all the way along that edge. Now, when you look down the tube from the other end, and I realize you can't see that from where you're at, but when I look down there, these two pieces of tubing that I crimped together are nicely closed. There's not like a big old air gap in there. So that's pretty much it. We've got our tube for the cedar shoe made. So this is going to go right down here at the bottom, okay? Okay, so now that we've got this part of it done, the foot and then this hammer stop washer, let's make one more piece and then we're going to pull all this together and make our slide hammer planter. So what we need to do is we've got our shoe that we just made. We're going to take that reducing coupler and just put it on there by hand, all right? And now our seed vial needs a way that it can stay on the top here of this. And what we're going to do is we'll take a piece of, this is a small piece of high density polyethylene from a water bottle, not a water bottle, a soda bottle. The dimensions are right here, 2 inches high by 4 1/8 inch, this direction. And I cut it out of the water bottle, and so the water bottle was oriented this way. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this and wrap it around our reducing coupler, get the edge here lined up. Then we'll take a little bit of tape, just cellophane tape, and we're going to just temporarily hold that together. Okay, so that's just right at the seam, okay? Now you can see the seed vial slips in there perfectly. Now what we do is we remove this so it stays in the tube, and we're going to take a piece of duct tape. Okay. Hold on. Okay, so we got a piece of duct tape, and I'm just going to tear it down the middle. And what this duct tape is going to do is it's going to seal the outer seam here as well as the inner seam. So we'll place it through the tube and get it lined up so that it will obviously go over the inner seam and the outer seam. And then we just first connect it on the inside. Okay, so it's nicely connected there. And then what I'm going to do is, I don't want to have a big old seam here, so I'm going to rip this off a little bit to shorten it a little bit right there. Okay, so that piece goes right up to the top there. And then this piece here, look at that, it's pretty good. Goes right to the bottom. So this way we've really made this extension tube much stronger. It's not going to come apart now. And that can fit really nicely onto the extension, onto the reducing coupler. Now the easiest way to get it on there is to actually bring it through like that. Okay, so there we go. We've got our extension tube on the reducing coupler, and our seed vial sits in there real nicely. Okay, so that's the last thing we needed to fabricate, and then we take one of the, actually this must be an extra here. We take one of our, this is the number 12 clamps, and we grab our socket wrench, just tighten that in, okay. You could actually connect it on there with tape if you wanted to, but I prefer to have it on with a hose clamp. All right, so that's it right there. The cedar shoe assembly is all ready to go. What we need to do is connect this to this part here. And the easiest way I found to do this is to take the largest, so the largest hose clamp goes on first. Just slide that all the way up there. Take the next two number 12 ones. I'm sorry, yeah, the number 12. So this first one is number 16, then these two are number 12s. Slide those on there. Make sure these are open enough. Okay. And then we are going to take our tube here, I'm sorry, the shoe, and just slide it in like that. Okay, so I need to bring my shoe down a little bit more. The depth that the seed will go depends on how far this is down. The further this is down, the bottom of the shoe, the deeper the hole that will be made in the soil, and that will then push that or allow the seed to go down there. I'm just going to remove this for a minute. All right, now I get this lined up, and what you'll hopefully can see is I'm going to tighten this one first. This one's the one that goes actually around the bottom part of the reducing coupler, and I'm tightening it. It's on the side here. It's not going this way. It's like that. Okay, I'm going to just get that one a little bit tighter. And then this guy here, okay, we got that one there. Actually, I'm going to switch this one over. Hold on just a minute. You could have these, I'm just going to have all these ends face the same direction. It'll just make it a little bit easier to adjust. All right, so that one's there. We'll now tighten this guy up. About halfway up there, and then the last one here. You can see how the socket wrench really comes in handy. If you had to do this with a screwdriver, it's not nearly as good. Okay, so when I'm doing this, I want to make sure that my tube is lined up, the copper tube is lined up with the EMT tube, and the V is facing just like that. So see that there? So it's nice and symmetrical. Okay. So we've got just about got that all done there. Look at that. It's looking beautiful, huh? All right. So there we go. That's the cedar tube assembly on there. Now, next part here is we need to have a way that we're going to be able to secure this in there, because when the hammer stop, or when the slide hammer hits this, we don't want this thing jumping out. And so for that, we're going to take another one of our little clamps, and this is the number 8 size clamp. Okay, I'm going to open this one all the way up, and I'm going to put it around this part of the tube here. Close it back a little bit. Okay. Now, if you're wondering what the flag is for, I've already cut this flag in half, but or a little bit less than half. This was a long flag, and I'm just using a piece of wire out of this. So I took this flag, and I'm just using the wire, and I formed that wire into a J shape like this. This J shape, the length of the wire before I cut it was 6 inches long, all right? And notice there's a little hook on the top, and then there's a little hook, this piece down here. And what I'm going to do is just take this, thread it through like that. You can see it just hangs on there like that. Then I lower it down to my seed vial, and tighten it up. So this J-shaped wire basically just pushes against the top of the cap for the seed vial and keeps that vial in there. So this isn't going anywhere. Now, when you want to change your tube, your vial, all you got to do is pull that to the side. It's springy, right? So pull it to the side, it springs back, and it holds in there. So that's our seed vial, right? Okay, so that's that bit. Let me tighten that just a little bit more. Now we've just got one more part to do. All right, now let's move up to the slide hammer. Pretty basic, pretty simple, but very effective. We'll take our threaded nipple. This is an 8-inch long piece of PVC. Oops, make sure you don't strip this when you put that on there. Okay, got it there. Put the other T on the other end. Now, in the paper, I describe an experiment that I did with the weights of the slide hammer. And the weight that I found works well and is not overly heavy is basically this right here. So 2 of these 3/4 inch T's connected to the riser, and then a 3/4 inch elbow. Now you could probably leave this off and it'll be fine, but because this is basically the weight of the original one that I found worked really well, I just kind of stick with this, and it's somewhere in the range of like 600 or so grams, this whole piece, all right? Now that slides freely over that, and look at that. Okay, we're just about done. Man, this doesn't take long at all. Okay, so let's put this on the handle. You can see that there. It's working just like it should. And now we got one little last thing to do here. So I've got 2 more clamps. Okay, one of these clamps, this one here, the smaller one, that one goes right here with a slide hammer, and it just slides with it. If I didn't have this clamp on here and I just put my spring on here, the spring can go inside the slide hammer, and that's not what you want, because you want the slide hammer to engage the spring. So we put this clamp in there, and that way the spring cannot go inside there. And then we are going to connect the top of the spring to the handle, and we'll be done. It's a pretty simple design. Took a fair bit of time to figure it out, but I'm actually really happy with it. I like how it is all relatively simple, and it works really, really well. Okay, so look at that. Okay, so there's our slide hammer seater. Now I'm going to say something about the top of this that's really important. That is the spring section. The spring that I've chosen is one that does not completely compress when you lift up the seater. Okay, so it took a little time to figure out what type of spring would work well for this, but the spring specifications that are described in the description of the video and in the paper, this spring works really well. Okay, so when the seater is lifted up, the spring engages, and that keeps the slide hammer from jarring the end here and dropping seed when you're moving the seater from spot to spot. You don't want the seater to drop seed until the slide hammer strikes the washer, okay? So there you have it. The slide hammer seeder. And it works really well for a lot of really small species of seeds, as well as some even larger ones, although I haven't tried anything bigger than, say, a chive seed. So one thing you might be wondering is, how does this seeder work to provide such precise seeding rates? What's the mechanism? It seems so simple. Well, here's the way it works. So when the seed's in this vial here, and there's holes in the bottom of the vial, what keeps the seed from flowing out of that vial when it's not disrupted is this basically an arch or a bridge of seed that's formed just above the hole of the vial. Now if the hole in the vial is too big, of course the seed's just going to pour out the bottom. But if the hole in the vial is just large enough to allow seed to flow through it, but also small enough to allow the seed to form a bridge above the top of the hole, then the seed won't do anything until the slide hammer disrupts that bridge, and then a few seeds just above the hole fall through the bottom of the hole. Now, one thing I should mention, in most cases, this concept of bridging or arching of materials above a hole in an agricultural tool, like a piece of equipment, it's a problem. For example, if you're planting, if you're fertilizing a field with fertilizers, whether or not they're organic fertilizers like pelleted chicken manure or synthetic nitrogen fertilizers that have been pelleted, what you don't want to have happen is for there to be a bridge that forms right above the hole that dispenses the material. You want that material to keep moving through there. But ironically, with this cedar, we actually want the bridge to form. We want the bridge to form until we strike the strike the slide hammer down, and then it disrupts that bridge and allows a small amount of seed to flow through there. So in a nutshell, that's how the cedar works, is that we've got these bridges or arches that form right above the hole, and the seed won't flow out of there until that is disrupted by the hammering device. So I wanted to just give you a quick demonstration of how easily the cedar works. And this is a field of romaine lettuce where normally we would plant the alyssum into it much earlier when the plants are just emerging or soon after thinning. And that way we can see exactly where the lettuce plants are and put the alyssum at whatever density you want to in between those plants. The advantage of that is that the alyssum has lots of time to form flowers. It takes about 30 days or so for it to start flowering, and those flowers will be in the lettuce crop for a long enough time while the lettuce is growing to attract in beneficial insects like hoverflies into the field and help us to control aphids on our lettuce. But for demonstration purposes, this field will work because I just wanted to show you, how fast we would normally walk and kind of how easy it is. So what I've got here is I've got my vial, and this is the vial that's specific for sweet alyssum. I've got the appropriate hole size in the bottom, and I've got about 1/2 or 3/4 of a vial full of the raw seed. I'll put it in the top of the extension tube there on the cedar, and I always like to check and make sure that I've got alyssum seed coming out the bottom, and also that my cedar shoe depth is set correctly. Okay, so I'm not going to go very deep on this field, but this should work fine for getting this just as a demonstration purpose. So I'm just going along here at a pretty relaxed speed.
Here's a little song I wrote. You might want to sing it note for note. Don't worry. Be happy. In every life we have some trouble. When you worry, you make it double. Don't worry. Be happy. Don't worry, be happy now. Don't worry. Be happy. Don't worry, be happy. Don't worry. Be happy. Don't worry, be happy. Ain't got no place to lay your head. Somebody came and took your bed. Don't worry. Be happy. The landlord say your rent is late. He may have to litigate. Don't worry. Be happy. Look at me, I'm happy. Don't worry. Be happy. Hey, I give you my phone number. When you're worried, call me. I'll make you happy. Don't worry. Be happy. cash, ain't got no style, ain't got no girl to make you smile. But don't worry, be happy. 'Cause when you worry, your face will frown, and that will bring everybody down. So don't worry, be happy.
One thing I should mention that's kind of important is where should you put the holes? So my suggestion is to put the holes in a part of the vial bottom where it's easy to drill, but also where the bottom is relatively flat. So I would suggest on these outer sections of the vial where there's no irregularities in the shape of the bottom, just put your holes there. Obviously, the more holes you put, the more seed that's going to flow through there if the hole is appropriately sized for the vial. If you go to a really good hardware store, a really good one, you'll find a lot of different size drill bits in addition to sort of the standard set here. So these standard sets going down to 1/16 inch are pretty easy to find. But if it's a really good hardware store, they'll probably have a lot of other drill sizes in either millimeters or wire gauge size. And if you really want a super small drill bit set, you could use a jeweler's drill. So this is a jeweler's drill set. These are extremely small, and you have to use these with a special drill. This is the drill that you can use with that. It just, it's got a spring in there, and it rotates back and forth as you push this down, and it works really well for making really small holes in the bottoms of the vial. So I thought I would just mention that in case you're wondering where to get drill bits. One other thing that may be helpful is when I was trying to figure out which size drill bit to use or to try out with different seed types, I created a whole bunch of little pieces of tape here with a label on there with some seeds in there. This one here is the alyssum one, so there's the sweet alyssum seed in there, the brown seed. And next to it, I actually put grain amaranth. So grain amaranth is kind of a nice standard. I use it kind of as a standard for relatively small size seeds, something to compare other small seeds with. So if I know what size drill bit works well for grain amaranth, and I see that alyssum is a little bit bigger, then I know, well, I need to use a bigger drill bit than what I used for grain amaranth. So that's just an easy way to keep track of the seed, and I always have a sample that you can, compare with just by eye or under a microscope with your drill bit sizes. If you'll read in the paper, I talk about how to select the best size or an appropriate size hole. You generally want that hole to be slightly larger than the length of the seed. That way the seed can fit through the hole and not get clogged in there. I'm going to say a little bit about seeding rate. So when you're trying to figure out the best seeding rate, so the first thing with figuring out the seed hole size is to figure out a hole that will allow the seed to flow through the vial. That's the important thing. The next thing is if you want to increase your seeding rate, well, you just put more holes of the same appropriate hole size. So in the paper I show you several figures where I put one hole versus two holes, and it does increase the seeding rate when you have more holes. It makes sense. So that's one way to increase seeding rate. Now another thing you could do is you can take grain amaranth seed like this, and you can use it to dilute seed to reduce the seeding rate of something. So this may not work with all seeds, but it worked quite well with purslane. So I was able to take purslane seed. This is selected varieties of purslane. The seed's somewhat expensive, and you can mix that purslane seed with some killed grain amaranth seed, and that allows you to further adjust your seeding rate rather than just having pure purslane seed in the vial. Okay, so you can adjust the seeding rate by adjusting the number of holes and by adjusting the amount of the target seed or the live seed that you want that's going to come out based on how much you've mixed with another seed type. So the easy way to kill this grain amaranth seed is just stick it in a bowl and put it in the microwave until it gets really hot. Okay, so that should kill the grain amaranth seed, and that way it's just acting as a carrier for the other seeds as those other seeds are planted. The nice thing about using grain amaranth too is that it's easy to see. So when you're trying to figure out, do you have the right seeding depth here with your shoe? Well, grain amaranth is great because you can see it really easily in dark colored soil. So you might just have a vial of just grain amaranth seed, which you use just for calibrating how much to move this cedar shoe down relative to the cedar foot, okay? Trying to think if I've forgotten anything. Let me just quickly check my, I do have a few more things I'd like to share with you. So one of them is alternatives. So when I was putting together the paper, I found that this vial works really well, okay? So this vial works great inside this with this reducing coupler end of the cedar tube. But they sell these vials in cases of about 144 of them. So maybe you don't want to pay $50 for 144 of these little vials. So what you could use as an alternative are medicine vials, pill vials. They're pretty similar in size. The pill vial is a little bit bigger than this 7 dram. This is a 7 dram vial. So the pill vial is a little bit bigger. But what I did was I took an extension, I made an extension tube specifically for the pill vial. So my piece of plastic that goes around here it's not this size, it's a little bit larger than that. So I made an extension tube that fits nicely with the pill vial, and then I just added some duct tape around the reducing coupler until the extension tube for this pill vial fit onto it. So that fits like that, and then we again put our clamp on there. Now, one thing I do want to note about this, let me get this off first. This pill vial, you want to make sure, because the pill vial is a little bit larger than the top end of the reducing coupler, you want to make sure that your holes are definitely drilled in an area where the seed can fall through the bottom of this. You don't want to have the seed too close to the edge of or the hole too close to the edge of the vial. Okay, so that was one kind of neat alternative seed vial method. I don't know about you, but it seems like I can often find old seed vials or old pill vials, and those would be a nice thing to recycle. Yeah, a few other alternatives. So the cedar shoe that I showed here that we made, this was out of that thicker tubing, but you can also make it out of the thinner copper tubing. It probably won't just last as long because it may wear down a little bit faster in the soil, but I just wanted to mention that. And then I also made one out of this PEX. So this PEX is, this is a type of tubing that they're using in a lot of houses nowadays. This PEX is the same size as copper tubing, and so you could also this one I just cut with a knife, so that this cedar shoe is not made with copper, it's just that PEX tubing, and it fits perfectly with the reducing coupler for the, just like the other one. Okay, and I wanted to mention early on, so when I first started making the cedars, I didn't actually use copper for the cedar shoe at all. I actually used EMT tubing. EMT tubing works as well. It's a little bit harder to work with, but you can see I made a little cedar shoe here. One thing that's different though is this EMT tubing does not have, there's no coupler that will attach with it. It's not meant for that. And so you might be able to figure something where you just tape this on there, I guess. That would be an option. but I actually found that having the copper on here allows it's a little bit easier to connect a smaller tube. This copper is slightly smaller than the EMT. It's a little bit easier to connect a copper tube to the EMT than to use an EMT cedar tube connected with the actual EMT handle. So that's just something to keep in mind. You could use this if you want, I guess, if you want to figure it out, but I prefer the copper. Now there are, of course, some other alternatives that you may come up with. For example, if for some reason you have a really hard time finding a spring that works, another thing that I thought could work would be to take a piece of rubber tubing. I don't know if you've seen some of my other videos, but I'm kind of like using bicycle tubing for things. And you could actually connect that rubber tubing, a piece of rubber tubing, just a thin strip of it, right onto here with a hose clamp, and then clamp it also onto the bottom of this slide hammer device, and that would act as a cushion. So when this was lifted, that piece of rubber tubing would stretch, and then it would stop, and that would be an alternative to using the spring up here at the top. So just something to keep in mind as an alternative, especially if you have a really hard time finding the spring. The first spring I found in a hardware store, and it worked great. When I went back again, I couldn't find the same size spring, and so I had to contact a company that makes springs and say, can you match the spring that I initially was finding useful? And that's the one that I have listed in the video description. Anyway, so probably the most important thing is have fun as you're making it, and I hope that you will find this beautiful little planter useful for planting sweet alyssum or whatever kind of small seeds that you want to plant. Now, like any good design, there are early prototypes that work, maybe, but maybe don't work quite as well. I want to show you, this is the first slide hammer design that I came up with. It was much more crude than the one that I suggest that you make. I used a lot more hose clamps. I didn't actually figure out that you could stick this angle piece, the foot, inside there until later, but I just wanted to show you this because I thought it might be interesting to you. I didn't use a reducing coupler for holding the seed vial. I actually used a piece of PVC tubing that sat inside of, or not PVC tubing, but a drip tape tubing which sat inside this funnel, and then the seed vial went inside there, and then the wire actually was just kind of bent around there, and it held it in place. In this case, the seed came out of the tube down into the bottom of this funnel, and then that flowed down through this other piece of flexible vinyl tubing and out the bottom here. So that part was very different than the, I think, more elegantly designed, simpler system that I've showed you with the copper. Another thing that is very different here is that the slide hammer stop washer, in the initial planter, I drilled a hole through this and just put a bolt through there, and then had some clamps above that with a washer on there. But I don't know if you can see this, over time this bolt takes a lot of beating, and so that bolt eventually breaks. So this worked very well, but it's not quite as durable. Early on, I also was making the nipple. I was just using a galvanized metal nipple here, or a riser. But I actually think that the plastic is better because plastic rubbing against metal doesn't wear, whereas metal rubbing against metal will wear down. So I just wanted to show you that as an alternative because I think it's interesting to see how designs are improved and modified over time. So that's the initial original slide hammer seeder. All right, let's see. Anything else to mention? If you've got any modifications or improvements, go ahead and send them to me. Who knows, maybe I'll even put a link to some of those improvements in the video description here so that we can continually improve this design or share ideas on how it worked or didn't work. All right, that's about it for now. Take care.
Here's a little song I wrote. You might want to sing it note for note. Don't worry, be happy.